What was the moment for you that finally made you say, wow, people really are this stupid? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Lots of great answers. Here's my anecdotal story. I used to work in a bookstore. A woman comes in asking about the true story of Lord of the Rings. I assumed she meant a biography of J.R.R. Tolkien or a book about how the books movies were made. No. She goes on to explain that she is looking for history books about the Middle Ages that talk about the elves and dwarves. She is specifically interested in elves because her whole family is tall and she thinks she might be descended from elves. I very politely explained to her that the book is fictional, aka not true, and that it calls it Middle Earth, not Middle Ages. The books are shelved in the fantasy section because they aren't true. She was visibly taken aback and had tears in her eyes as she left the store. I'm not sure if she was sad that it wasn't true or because she wasn't an elf. That person drove to my store. Someone gave her a driver's license and a job and money. Answer: I have a similar bookstore story. Years ago, I worked in a bookstore. Someone asked about books about dinosaurs. So in an effort to the detective work on what they were looking for, I asked if it was for an adult or kids. He said it was for an adult. Okay, fine. The second Jurassic Park movie had just come out and dinos were big then. I followed up. Was he looking for artwork or more scientific material? Oh, scientific. Fine. I took him over to the paleontology section. As we walked, he wanted to make sure there were pics of the dinos, and I assured him that the books all would. While thumbing through a few books from museums of skeletons or other books that had artistic interpretations of the dinos, he clarified, I want actual photos of actual dinosaurs. Oh, Jeebus. I had the unfortunate experience of trying to explain to this low-wattage moron that dinosaurs and cameras were separated by several 100 million years. He didn't take it well. Story 2. Coworker had maxed out her credit card and didn't know how to be able to use it again. I asked her if she was just making the minimum payment, and she said, "What payment?" She didn't know she had to pay back the money she used on the card. Just thought it was free money. Answer: I had a customer like that. I'm an insurance adjuster. I wrote an estimate on her car and sent her the check. She calls me when the car is done at the body shop and says she needs another check. I asked if she lost it. Nope, she said she bought a few handbags and I have to write her another check. She thought once you had a claim, she got free money. I had many people that years after having a claim, they'd have another accident, but couldn't comprehend that it would be a new claim. I could write a book on stupidity. Story 3. There's a tweet from a national park talking about people complaining how hard the trash cans are to open that read, "There is considerable overlap between our park's smartest bears and our park's dumbest tourists." Story 4. Every time I read about someone backing up off the edge of a cliff while taking a selfie. Answer: a few years ago, we were on a road trip through the Rockies. There was a beautiful and popular scenic overlook along the highway, so we stopped to check it out. It was very clearly marked where people were allowed to stand due to the obvious safety concerns about cliffs, falling rock, wildlife, etc. The number of people who blatantly ignored the signs and railings and simply climbed over them was astounding to me. And there was one woman who was barely holding on to a very, very precipitous-looking rock face, trying to take a selfie, and my anxiety could not handle it. We needed to leave because I started getting so stressed that someone was going to fall and my children were going to witness a completely preventable death on our vacation. Story 5. Anytime someone tries to board public transport without letting people off first, then acting indignant that they can't get on. Story 6. I was working at a dark sky park and a woman asked me if the statues on the self-guided nature hike had RFID. I said no, and she started gushing about how nice it was to find a place she wasn't exposed to cell service or power lines because she is allergic to them. They give her migraines, apparently. She needs to be really far away from cell towers or power stations, or she suffers miserably. I didn't have the heart to tell her we were about a quarter mile from a small power station. She just couldn't see it because it was behind the tree line. Answer: I used to work in a cell phone store. Lady comes in with her husband and 2 kids for new phones. She insists that we turn off the 5G on her phones because they will be tracked otherwise. We kind of just shrug and agree to do it. Then when we set everything up and she freaks out, "Wait, we forgot to attach the 5G blocker from my old case." Her husband sighs, "Honey, stop dragging these guys into your nonsense. No, the government is monitoring us through the 5G, and if I don't add the blocker, they will remotely reactivate it." Finally, the husband gets pissed and yells, "I am so sick of this. I have tried to be nice. I have tried to be understanding. But now you're doing this shoot in front of the kids. Do not fill their head with this conspiracy bullshit." I look at her case and remove the blocker for her to put on the new case. It's just a thin piece of metal with some adhesive on the back. That's it. The couple barely spoke the rest of the transaction. Got 5 stars though. LOLA. Story 7. Sin Matinum. The few months I worked at one of those fuel centers outside of a popular retail chain, didn't even know there were that many ways to fudge up the process of pumping gas that I thought was pretty simple and straightforward. Almost every day, someone surprised me by doing something wrong in a whole different way. Answer. I work at a gas station now. It blows my mind how many people have trouble pumping gas, and they come in and blame us for messing something up. 90.9% of the time, it's user error. I learned quickly it's easier to just go pump the gas for these people because explaining how the system works usually just confuses them and takes longer. This happens several times a day. We have a look we give each other that means, "I'm headed out to pump gas for some idiot." Then at least once a week, someone drives off with the pump still in their car. I really didn't think pumping gas was this difficult. Story 8. Realizing why most products have warning labels, like not to stick a curling iron into any orifice. Story 9. I work in info security. That should be reason alone, but here is a good one. My company is very large, maybe 150,000 employees in the healthcare sector. So security is tight. We stick to HIPAA, ISO, NIST, CISA, every abbreviated standards and governance body you can think of. We routinely send out fake phishing emails to everyone. Some are terrible. Misspelling the company name, nothing but a link and some gibberish, third-grade grammar, and so on. The links usually bring you to a website we host that says, "You clicked on a phishing link." If this were a real fish, you would have potentially infected our organization, put patient information at risk, cost us millions, and definitely lost your job. Please visit the HR training page and retake the security training program, or something along those lines. Sometimes after they click, people with reply to the original phishing email. "I think the web page is broken. Here is my username and password so I can sign up for the raffle to meet Taylor Swift." One of them was my boss's boss. Story 10. I had a client I was working with. She was on her 3rd pregnancy. We were on our way to a doctor's appointment, and out of nowhere, she says, "I didn't know having could get you pregnant till my 2nd baby. I had to fight for my life to control my expressions. Because what titty. Story 11. Years ago, someone posted a video of a water spraying from a sprinkler system. She said, "What are they putting in our water?" She didn't understand why it made a rainbow. Answer. One of my college roommates dated a guy who refused to drink tap water because he believed that there were so many women on birth control that it was impossible for the water treatment plants to filter out all the estrogen in urine. If males drank this water, they would grow breasts. He told us that he didn't trust city water and demanded that we keep bottled water in our fridge for when he visited. Roommate bought a few bottles and always refilled them with tap water after he left. Dumb never noticed they weren't sealed. Story 12. Seeing an Instagram influencer promoting turpentine as an all-natural, true trusted way to detox and get rid of parasites and encouraging people to drink a shot of turpentine every 2 weeks. I guffawed until I saw the like count. Over 250K likes, thousands of shares, and hundreds of natural is best. Why did we ever stop doing this? Comments. I can tell you why. We finally figured out that while turpentine is great for varnishing or uses as a solvent, it really isn't ideal to ingest. Story 13. Whenever people on the internet believe something was intended specifically for them, as though there were roughly 3 dozen people on Earth and their existence matters as part of every happening and solution. Sometimes this takes the form of Keanu Reeves personally trusting them to borrow their money. Sometimes that they won $3 million randomly in a lottery they didn't even enter. Sometimes that a politician is depending on them personally to share copy pasta or some kind, or drawing some kind of connection. E looked at 2 different websites that is supposed to solve a crime hundreds of people have been investigating for decades, or asking ChatGPT on behalf of another poster as though ChatGPT is their own personal secret weapon. People's inflated sense of personal importance and exceptionality, despite living in places where they have first-hand knowledge every single day of how many people inhabit the earth. Certainly this cannot just be a survival mechanism, because it certainly isn't promoting survival. How do people believe they are this important all the time? Answer: the internet is making it painfully obvious that a huge amount of humanity, possibly the majority, does not have well-developed theory of mind. We are all on a continuum that stretches from empathetic and able to understand others' thoughts and feelings to other people are objects. Personally, from my observations, I would say the majority of people are somewhere in the middle under able to understand others as semi-autonomous caricatures. Hence all the stereotyping. What I'm unclear on is if this is an ability that can be improved through training practice experiences or if it's a developmental window that just gets skipped and is permanent. Story 14. Shortly after 911, a coworker from Pakistan stopped by my desk and asked me if I know what a continent is. I named them for her, and her only response was good. I thought you would know. Then she just walked off. I followed up with her later because I was very confused about why she would have asked me about that. It turns out some other coworkers of a similar age had asked her about the Middle East, Iraq, etc. Those coworkers had to stop her explanation to ask what a continent even is. These were people who had young kids. Such a failure of our education system and a lack of curiosity on the part of my coworkers. It was disappointing. Story 15. Seeing teachers I once respected post on Facebook shattered reality. Story 16. Working IT, and a guy comes up to me and says that the color printer is not making color copies. I asked to see the original. It was black and white. I asked the guy what color he'd like to show up on the color copy. Story 17. There have been so many recently, but the one that stands out the most to me is people actually believing that some schools are providing litter boxes for students who identify as cats. So much so that there is actual legislation being proposed to ban the practice. That isn't actually happening. Answer: was in a car a while ago with one very MAGA guy and me and my very camp but absolutely straight ex-ballet dancer friend. MAGA says his sister told him about this happening at her grandchild's school. We both said straight up, "You're lying." He was very upset we called him and his sister liars. So I told him the real reason there's kitty litter in some classrooms. 2 reasons actually. So kids can pee somewhere during a shooter lockdown and to soak up the blood if someone is actually shot. No, I'm not kidding. Story 18. An exercise instructor at the senior center told me she couldn't have an echo device because they emit gamma rays, and gamma rays gave her fibromyalgia. So much to unpack there. Story 19. I work in healthcare. One very commonly prescribed cough syrup and anti-nausea medicine is called Phenergan, chemical name promethazine. The number of times a patient or their family member has accused us of giving them meth because it had meth in the name is way too darn high. They insisted the reason they felt sleepy after taking a medication known for causing drowsiness was because we gave them meth. Yeah, because meth is known for making people sleepy. See. Story 20. I used to work at a pizza shop. People would regularly gauge a pizza's size by the number of slices. They wouldn't ask its diameter. How many slices? Hello, could you tell me how many times you cut a pizza? That's how I determine how big of a pizza it is. Story 21. Back when I worked in banking, I had flagged an account that made a deposit into an ATM. The check deposited into the same account it was drawn on. This was an occasional problem because banking laws, when someone deposits a check, they have to have the first 100 available to them. So people would do this on weekends when they were broke. I had my boss come in and tell me to remove the flag. I was dumbfounded. How could it be anything but? Well, I guess our account holder, early 30s, had a friend that owed her money but said friend had run out of checks. So being the generous person our client was, she said, "That's okay, just borrow one of mine." Yes, she scratched her name off and put her friend's name in, and the check was signed by her friend. Someone got a few lessons in banking that day. Story 22. When I realized people still believe in flat earth theory. Answer. I used to think that flat earth people were a prank. Same with young earth creationists, until I took a job where there was a bunch of them. Written history goes back 5,000 years. If the earth was only 5,000 years old, you'd think that would have been one of the first journal entries. Or about how some biblical character bought some really copper from Ian Asir. Flat earthers can and have made experiments to prove their theories. It's pretty funny when one of them proves the earth is round and they get shunned by the rest of the nuts. Story 23. The church my now ex was attending started a collection for a married couple that was having problems conceiving, and they thought it was time to consult a fertility doctor. Turn out this couple in their late 20s were not having. When this was discovered, no one at that church thought it was ridiculous. My sexually active girlfriend's reaction was that it could happen to anyone. Story 24. I work in traffic lights. When we install a new site, the push buttons will be covered with a bag or sticker that says, "Crossing not in use," with temporary crossing lights put in place. The amount of people that press the wrong button and then complain that it's not clear which one is working has killed my faith in human intelligence. Story 25. My hobby is electronics. I often repair stuff for friends. I went to college in San Diego, KA, and used to know a hot rich girl crew that I hung out with on occasion. Well, one day a girl from that group reached out asking if I did laptop repair. I said yes, and that I would have some time to look at it in a few days. Well, I went to her house, and the machine in question was an Apple MacBook Air Pro 2. She said that she had already thrown the previous laptop in the garbage, and this was the replacement they sent, which was also broken. She also said if I couldn't fix it, I was welcome to keep it. Keep in mind, this was when that model had just come out. Not an inexpensive trash item. I said we should take a look at what is going on before we make those decisions. I go to turn it on and it's dead, so I ask for the charging cable. I swear to God, y'all, it was the meme of the lady doing calculus in her head. This girl deadass told me it doesn't have a charger. I said it should have come with one. She was adamant that laptops do not need to charge. Apparently, she had gone on a trip somewhere, but didn't bring a charger. Her ex had set up the computer, and it had, I guess, never moved or been unplugged from its place on the desk until then. She assumed it was broken when the battery died. I desperately tried and failed to explain that the laptop needs to charge, just like her phone. She insisted that was wrong because obviously phones and computers are different. Long story short, she refused to charge it, gave it to me, and went through another 2 replacement laptops before her dad put his foot down. Story 26. People who don't believe that bacteria viruses exist. Story 27. It wasn't a single moment. It's been more like watching a slow-motion freeway pileup that just keeps piling up. Story 28. I work in a sex shop. People sometimes try to return or exchange their used toys. There is a warranty for broken products, but we can't take back a toy simply because you don't like it, Karen. Story 29. Working at Wendy's, had a lady ask what the difference between a chocolate and vanilla Frosty. Story 30. Sign in the bathroom warning people not to put their hands in the toilet. This is a public restroom, just blick. Story 31. The pandemic. I used to really have trouble suspending disbelief watching apocalypse movies or shows. I used to say people aren't that dumb. People aren't going to behave like that. I guess in a way I was right. It's actually much worse. Story 32. In the Navy on deployment out in the middle of the mid-Atlantic Ocean. We were having some of the roughest seas and the top side of the ship was secured to everyone except for lookouts who were required to have life jackets and glow sticks and man overboard indicators. I was transitioning from my lookout watch at around 3 a.m. and there was a Marine who thought it was a great idea to be outside in the dark, curled in a ball in his workout clothes in the corner by the life rails. He told nobody he was outside and was one heavy wave from being missing, and nobody would have known he was gone till next day. He didn't seem to see a problem with it because he said that being closer to the waves helped his seasickness. Story 33. COVID lockdown. I work in a hospital. There is no bottom to the idiocy of the human race. Answer. This entire thing made me feel very misanthropic at the time. My best friend works in a care home for the elderly, and while she and her staff were out there every day putting themselves at risk before the vaccines were available, And we didn't even really know anything about the virus and a PPE shortage. So essentially, they were marching headfirst into an unknown horror show every day to care for their residents. People were throwing tantrums about wearing masks and not being able to go to the pub for a while. It really put it into perspective for me how divided we are. It was like in movies, there are the clear good guys and bad guys that up for everyone else. Like my friend was high risk, had a letter sent to her by the NHS telling her to isolate because of it, but of course she couldn't. So regardless, she was in a care home every day, which was a hotbed for the virus, putting herself at risk and sleeping in one of the spare rooms at work so she wouldn't bring it home to her family. And these idiots were doing protests about having to stay home and their right to go to the pub and making fun of people who were just trying to do the right thing by wearing masks. When the vaccines came out, there were stickers all over London with anti-vax bullshit. I got so angry every time I saw one, thinking about what my friend and many others went through who were finally able to get vaccinated, and these wankers were even protesting that. Story 34. I worked as a temp in a data processing complex that offered seasonal work. It was a hot summer, and their workplace had put on cold drinks and frozen lollies for us, among other little perks. And one of the things it had organized for the communal break room lounge was 5 or 6 portable, plug-in air conditioners. Well, one roasting hot day, I walk into the communal break area and am met with a wall of heat. The room is full of people. I estimate about 70 of them, and they are sitting around eating lunch, chatting, and so on. And on this blazing hot day, all of the windows are open because it's so hot, and all of the portable air conditioners are plugged in, set to max power. But the aircon unit's hot air vents aren't hanging out of the windows. They're just laying on the floor. So all that was happening when these machines were switched on full power was that the air in the room was only getting hotter, not colder. I got some funny looks as I made a point of moving the aircon units closer to the windows and hung the hot air vent hoses out. People just looked on bemused as I went to all this trouble to make sure the hot air got vented out the windows while the cold air coming out of the machines was what got distributed into the room. I shoot you not, there were 70 people in the room that must have thought aircon units were magical boxes that only produced cold air, so if the room was hot, the units should be turned on full power and left to do their thing. 70 people seemed to have no idea that all they were doing by keeping the exhausted air in the room, they were only making a hot room even hotter. Answer: I can 100% understand 70 people not understanding how these devices work. But what I do not understand is that none of the 70 was wondering why it was so freaking hot in there. Like hotter than it should be. And then just sat there and did no investigation as to why the units were not cooling the room down. I can bet you look these people totally different, and just people, humans in general. I know the older I get, the more I realize humans are not that smart. What I notice mostly is they do not listen very well, like they hear what they want to hear. Story 35. Reading this post this morning. Story 36. A client tried to purchase a gift card for his wife and then tried to slide in a coupon so that he'd be able to get the GC cheaper. I told him we couldn't do that, but his wife can stack the GC and the coupon once she books an aptee. He proceeds to tell me he's worked in retail for X amount of years. Bro, if you worked in retail, then you would know that little to no POS systems physically allow discounts on a gift card. He insists that he speak with a manager or owner. BC, he says I'm trying to be difficult. Owner was still working on a client and manager was working from home. Called manager, to which she told me exactly what I already told him. He gets in a puff and leaves, taking the coupon back and buying nothing for his wife. Fast forward about 2 weeks later, he comes back in with his wife, who is a sweetheart, watching him to make sure he buys it for her without complication. Dumbass cheapskate MFs, I tell you. Story 37. 3 instances, actually. 1. I had woman knock on my door one day and ask if I can turn off my Wi-Fi for a bit. She is parked out in front of my house waiting for someone, and my signal is so strong it is making her sick. She was enraged when I told her that's not a thing, nor is it my problem. This is one of those things I had even seen on the internet before and thought it was fake. Turns out, nope. These people are real. 2. The whole flat earth thing. I thought it was a joke at first, but people really are this stupid. 3. I work in EMS public safety. I lost a lot of faith in humanity and the intelligence of people during the COVID pandemic. My wife and I, who also works in healthcare, went from heroes to clearly part of a giant scheme that is here to kill us all. Story 38. Watching an adult resorting to bigotry because someone with a disability was trying to get up the stairs with a wheelchair. Story 39. When I see moms posting about hosting measles parties so all the kids can purposely get measles and then become immune, they believe the measles vaccine is dangerous. So the obvious answer is, then give your kids measles on purpose? Story 40. Someone asked why TeamViewer didn't work when their PC is off. I guess some people think PCs are magical. Story 41. I used to say conspiracy theories were my guilty pleasure. I got a kick out of how silly they were. That was until they became mainstream common knowledge. Jesus MFS, those are just supposed to be funny stories for the cover of National Enquirer. Not shoot, we actually believe. I am no longer tickled by conspiracy theories. Edit, corrected a misspelled word. Story 42. I chalk this up more to 18-year-olds acting like adults for the first time. But I was a travel agent. Girl from Kansas called for a Caribbean cruise. So, typically out of FL. She asked me how she was going to get to the cruise. Well, typically you'd fly. She asked if she had to drive to FL to catch her flight to FL. Story 43. Every single time someone fails to properly merge onto a highway and nearly cause a huge fudge up. Story 44. There are a ton of porch pirate shenanigans happening in my neighborhood these days, and am baffled because every other house has a Ring or Nest or Google Home type of camera, stupid enough to steal and assume there is no way to be seen. But then the still or video gets blasted on the neighborhood group, and these people have no face covering, are easily identifiable, or caught on surrounding cameras. Is it a lack of awareness or intelligence? IDEK. I'm glad they're not the brightest crayons in the box because they can be seen caught. They just look stupid in the process. Story 45. Everyone else seems to want to describe stupid people who are not like us. My epiphany was realizing that intelligent, well-meaning people can delude themselves into acting irrationally if they think they can do good. It was a PBS documentary on Nova, I think. Might have been Frontline, about the autistic therapy called facilitated communication, where a therapist gently holds the autistic person's arm, and this somehow enables a person who has never learned one word of English to type out things like, "My father forces me to perform sexual acts on him." A surprising number of cases involved horrific sexual crimes. Families were torn apart. Parents were sent to jail. When they finally did a double-blind test, they found, unsurprisingly, that no autistic subject ever typed anything but gibberish. Turns out that one of the leading proponents of FC would warn the therapists that they would probably uncover sexual crimes. The only therapist who had the courage to appear in the documentary seemed intelligent and caring. She said that she actually thought the child was typing the messages, but now she realized that it was her all along. I repeat, she did not seem like a nut, but rather seemed a lot like you and me. And if I had an autistic child, I would have trusted her 100. We all know stupid people who do stupid things. This documentary made me wonder if we all are capable of doing stupid things if we are motivated enough to override our intelligence. Anyway, here is a video that I have not watched that covers the scandal. Okay, the show was on Frontline, but it says it's not available for streaming. Story 46. I was having lunch outside on my break, and the account storms outside and looks straight up, then turns to me with a look of pure rage on her face, like the sort of look where she could start bawling or she could start swinging, and goes, "Disgusting, disgusting, would you look at that?" When she sees the utter confusion on my face after looking up at a beautiful summer sky, she goes, "Chemtrails, chemtrails," stares at me for another second, then goes back inside. Answer: was in a pub in Ireland when one older English woman started talking about it at the bar and wanted to prove her point by stating that she had her soil in West Cork tested and that they found aluminium in her soil, and she is certain that the big bad government is spoiling the soil by spraying aluminium and other nasty stuff from 800-kilometer high. I had to sit outside after that. I was on holiday and really didn't want to listen to that nonsense. Then she came out and said, "I didn't mean to upset you with the facts." Told her directly to fudge off. Of everything she could have chosen to prove her point, She chose aluminium, common in most soils around the world. I'm not a scientist, but knowing that aluminium is in soil is not a PhD level of education required. Story 47. The number of people who really think that schools have litter boxes for students who identify as cats. Story 48. That anti-vaccination has gained traction beyond your typical superstitious religious types, because I don't think people subject to immense religious conditioning since birth are stupid. Story 49. A gas station attendant using an oxyacetylene torch to unfreeze the lock on a storage cage filled with propane tanks. Story 50. Martyrs fourth war at uni. I'm on the top floor of the library and the fire alarm goes off. I'm sure it's just another unwelcome drill, but you have to react as if it's not, right? So I head to the nearest visible fire escape, turns out to be the main stairwell, and start heading down. By chance, I look down the stairwell at the lower floors and see that a long queue is forming, but the queue of students is trying to leave by the usual entrance exit, and none of them are heading to the actual fire escape, which is an easy line of sight of the usual entrance exit and down half a flight of stairs. Literally, it is a straight line and a short distance from the entrance exit on the ground floor of the stairwell to the actual fire escape. So what do? I start heading downstairs to the fire escape, as you're supposed to. There were at least 40 students in that stairwell, and all of them were forming an orderly queue to go back out of the building the same way they came in, and none of them were actually heading to the fire escape at the bottom of the stairwell, just a few steps further down from the usual entrance exit. To this day, I remember getting disapproving looks as I passed the long line of students that was backing up on that stairwell, as if I was skipping the queue. To this day, I remember some of them turning to companions and saying something in their ear. If the alarm hadn't been blaring, I'm sure it would have been some withering comments about me. I was so looking forward to Sparta kicking that fire escape open and shouting, "Get the hell out!" at their gormless faces. In a savage twist, a librarian beat me to it by about 5 seconds, and she ended up chastising not just the hapless queue of students, but also me as well as I walked past her. Folks, when the fire alarm goes off, or if there really is a fire, don't stop thinking and don't just look at what everyone else is doing. That library was full of paper and carpeted floors and flammable ceiling panels, and it would just have taken one burst of toxic smoke going into that stairwell, and about 50 students would have been found by firefighters who stacked up like cordwood, and their exit would have been blocked by the bodies of people who had been struggling to get out. When an actual fire escape was an easy line of sight if they had just turned their head to the right 90 degrees, or if they had cared to read the actual sign on the wall, which consisted of the words fire escape and an arrow pointing in the relevant direction. Answer: one time in high school, the fire alarm went off with about 5 to 10 minutes left in the period. Everyone went outside to the parking lot as usual. A few minutes later, the alarm might have been turned off by this point. I honestly don't remember. The bell rang, and like 75 of the people in the parking lot just walked right back into the building without any kind of all clear. Turns out it was a legit alarm. Someone's lunch caught on fire in the microwave in the teacher's lounge. It was under control quickly and ultimately not a big deal, but like, guys. Story 51. People claiming face masks are useless against COVID, while simultaneously claiming they could suffocate you to death. People proving Ashley Babbitt was unjustly killed during a guided tour of the Capitol by showing me the video of her going through a window she helped break down in order to get into a barricaded area with armed guards. People saying they're fine with their kid dying of measles instead of getting vaccinated. Story 52. Lived on an island for a few years, got lots of tourists during summer, and the only way on or off was a small ferry that ran hourly. I was waiting for my dad. Just people watching and eating ice cream on the docks. The ferry lineup extended all the way up the hill and to the gas station, clearly too many to fit on a single trip. The red light turned on. The ferry worker waved a stop sign and blew a whistle. Dipshit kept driving anyway in the wrong belief that if they could cram their car onto the ferry, they wouldn't make them get off. The person behind them assumed they must know something the lights, signs, and workers didn't, and also drove on. Then the next person did the same, and the next. I watched the ferry, dock, and hill get completely blocked, unable to back up an inch, no room to turn. They were still stuck when my dad and I walked back home. I wonder how long it took to unjam that mess. Story 53 came relatively early for me, and woman probably in her 60s at the time was my Sunday school teacher. She was one of the nicest people you would ever know. However, when I was about 10 years old, circa 1987, she was telling the class about having read a newspaper article about Volkswagen-sized bugs invading the southern United States. We were doubtful, so she pulled the newspaper out of her purse. It was the Weekly World News. Story 54. I got in trouble at a job once because I kept on pointing out how everyone picks and chooses what rules to follow. Then I got fired from that job after telling my supervisor's supervisor that I didn't trust my supervisor due to a conversation I had with her, in which she stated she wouldn't email me the instructions she just gave me verbally in writing for record because she didn't want to incriminate herself. I experienced a lot of moments at that place that taught me how stupid people could be and was made to be the bad guy for being one of the only non-stupid ones. Literally cried angry tears in a meeting once because I realized I was always going to be the one at fault because they had already decided I was. Then I was fired on the phone with no explanation. Story 55. I was like 16 in high school French class. I can't recall the exact specifics, but someone must be asked something along the lines of why certain French words appear to be spelled the same, but have slightly different sounds. Anyway, the teacher tells us this is the case with a lot of English words too, but we may not realize it. She then writes C and C on the chalkboard. She tells us that if we listen closely, when we say the word see, we'll notice that we're actually saying Sia. She then had the entire class say C and Sia repeatedly to demonstrate this. A lot of my classmates were like, gosh, how have I never realized this? That's so crazy. This was very much a everyone is stupid except me moment. I could not believe what I was witnessing. The teacher was dead serious, by the way. I was like, has this meanie never heard of homophone as a language teacher? Story 56. Co-worker refused to vaccinate against COVID because of the microchips in the vaccine. After she had almost died after spending 6 weeks in the hospital with COVID. My mental definition of average intelligence took a nosedive that day. Story 57. I had to explain to multiple grown adults on separate occasions that no, hippos aren't just female rhinos. Story 58. Oh, it not a single the moment. Rather, I am waiting for the moment that gets me believing in people again. Story 59. I was working as a newspaper reporter and a local company's employees were going on strike. I wanted to cover the employees' demands and explain why they were going on strike. I spoke to the person in charge and he basically told me to F off and hung up on me. I then went on to write the story from the company's POV and the strike ended 3 days after the article was published. Story 60. The Earth is only 6,000 years old. Story 61. Customer insisted that he bought the product from our store when we don't sell the product. Took him over an hour of arguing, even with his wife, and over the phone and in person, and still couldn't admit until he actually read the receipt and realized he'd bought it from down the street. Story 62. It was when my classmate legit thought the moon landing was fake and started arguing with the teacher about it. Like what? I was just sitting there like, wow, people are this dumb. Story 63. Freshman year in college, I took an astronomy class. The professor gave a free, funny question at the end of our final. It asked how many moons does Earth have? And one of my friends after class was dead serious saying that was the hardest test ever and asked me what I put down for the last question. I had to reason with her, like how many moons do you see at night, girl? Story 64. My answer. Back in the first days of COVID and people were more concerned about being told what to do and not be able to satisfy their own pleasures rather than acknowledging, hey, there's a pandemic involved. We're all trying to stay safe. Seriously, COVID brought out way too many true colors in people, and I'm glad it did. Answer. COVID was a serious turning point for me in how I interact with people. I live in a pretty red area, and people were just dunking and slamming the people wearing masks. So much so, I had just gotten over a major sinus infection and had trouble breathing out of my nose for about a week. I tested negative for COVID. My lawn had to be mowed, so I threw on a mask to keep the pollen out of my nose and tried not to increase chances of the infection coming back. As I was mowing, some redneck yelled out his truck as he passed, "Stop wearing masks, you hippie liberal snowflake." COVID really shook my faith in people, and I've not harbored hope in the general public for a long time. Story 65 looks around and gestures to 2025. Story 66. The moment that really made me say, wow, people really are this stupid, was when people started eating Tide Pods for internet fame. Story 67. When an older lady got mad that I didn't know how the boys' youth sweaters that I was hanging up at the skate shop right out of the box fit. I was a gangly 19-year female. I just gotten the shipment. LOL. The other was parents complaining that our shoes weren't quality because their teen sons drug their heels when they walked and were working on kickflips, which will destroy shoes so quick. Kinda miss working at the skate shop, LOL. Story 68. When I worked retail and people would get mad at me that their total wouldn't match the sale price listed, they always forgot about tax. Every time. Story 69. I think COVID really opened the floodgates for science medical disinformation. It's honestly really disheartening as a scientist, toxicologist, working in the biomedical field. I think the disinfo currently circulating that's making me heavy-sigh the most is the people who are convinced that the chemicals in sunscreen is what causes cancer, not the UV rays from the sun. There's absolutely nothing you can say to convince these people otherwise. They heard it from a wellness grifter on TikTok, so it's obviously true. Story 70. All the anti-face mask stuff during the pandemic. I can understand people having misgivings about a novel vaccine, but people kicking off about face masks being tyrannical government overreach when we were struggling with containing a respiratory disease largely transmitted by droplet dispersion was frankly unmitigatable stupidity. Story 71. I've told this before, but I was training a guy mid-20s at work. I was explaining how Anycast works, where we'd advertise an IP from multiple locations, and the traffic would typically go to the closest site. We had DCs in Amsterdam, Singapore, San Jose, and Virginia. So if the traffic was coming out of Russia, where would it likely go? Well, I haven't traveled very much. I don't know where Russia is. Me, not understanding, okay, how about if it was coming out of China? Like I said, I really haven't traveled very much. I don't know where China is. I mean, I've never been to Russia or China, but I can pick them out on a map. I just haven't traveled, so I don't know where those are. Pulls up blank map of continents, okay? This is your homework for tonight. You need to be able to name all of the continents by tomorrow. I will give the guy credit, though. He knew them the next day, and then we started working on countries. Adam. Story 72. I saw some video not too long ago about a killer who raised a bunch of money to relocate defense expenses, and I'm like, why would anyone give money to this cause? And then some girl at a park in NY said something improper to a child and got really rich off bad behavior. What is going on that this is okay here? Why are online crowdfunding hosts supporting this crap? Why is bad behavior being rewarded? And who are these PPL making them rich for their lack of humanity? The audacity of some people who think they're owed for their own messes they create, and the questionable character of those out there donating supporting poor behaviors astounds me. I've had many moments before this, but these two incidents made me truly question the stupidity of our USA people these days. ETA added the word improper to the first paragraph. Story 73. When I started to work in the corporate office, made me wonder how they stayed in business. Story 74. Saw a lady get mad at Bath and Body Works because they wouldn't take and replace her bottle of Suave shampoo. Story 75. I was trying to tell anyone a fun fact I learned about Australia. So I started with, how the seasons in the southern hemisphere are opposite from ours? And it took me like 6 people before someone already knew that. That was not the fun fact that's just common knowledge. Or so I thought. Story 76. People online passing around AI images as legitimate photographs when they should be obviously AI to anyone with eyes and a brain. Story 77. The advent of social media. People used to be dumb in private. Story 78. Me and my coworkers are experts in our field of study. We have to have conversations with family and acquaintances where they parrot elaborate misinformation they heard on a podcast or Facebook loudly and proudly. They don't ask us questions because they think we're, I don't know, brainwashed maybe? They can't answer the most basic questions about the subject, But yeah, believe a podcaster over your own family and call it my data or my truth. Story 79. Creationists asking me to consider God's feelings on my atheism. Story 80. Had a patient that had chronic wounds and skin issues, and they asked me if washing their skin with bleach would help prevent infections. Story 81. I've had a career in IT, so I guess the second or third ticket I ever had to deal with. I don't understand how some people even dress themselves with the levels of stupidity. Answer. I had a coworker years ago who knew I was more tech savvy than most. So she was asking me about increasing the amount of RAM on her computer because she heard it could make it run better. I was trying to determine whether she or her husband could do it themselves because, while I have installed RAM into my home PC myself, I realize it's not within everyone's skill set. After a few minutes, I realized she thought that she would buy the RAM on a CD and it would install into her computer like a program. And in fact, she couldn't understand why it wouldn't work like that. And she got very annoyed at me when I suggested she would be better off consulting a professional. Needless to say, I have sympathy for people who provide tech support. Story 82. The pandemic did it for me, taking animal dewormer, the POTUS suggesting ingesting bleach, Shkanon conspiracies. Story 83. Chickenpox parties and measles parties in fundamentalist and evangelical home living room churches. These were places in the 70s, 80s where people pretended to speak in tongues that an interpreter claimed was God speaking through the lunatic babbler, passing the collection plate and saying no one should vaccinate their kids because vaccines and contact lens solutions caused autism. Using fluoride does too, but if you gave them this money, they could stop all that and the evil old government race traders now in charge from forcing public health laws on you. Those of us who didn't object or just get up and walk out, they were the stupids that just kept on being stupid, becoming more stupid as they got older. They passed their stupid on to their own kids, and now we're dealing with their stupid grandkids. Cult churches, televangelists, and campus crusaders, take a bow. Well, hallelujah. This is the day their greed and delusions, the people's desire to be deemed worthy and most favored, while gaining social points by killing, harming, depriving, and hating other people's children, hath made. Story 84. The 2024 presidential election in the U.S. Story 85. Driving in America, you'll witness a lot of really insane things. I've lived a few places recently across the country, edging homelessness FR, and I can confirm drivers are often really that stupid. Think my favorite recent memory was someone passing around a blind corner on a 2-lane road in Kansas, and I had to swerve off the road to avoid an accident. Thankfully, my reaction time was good enough. Story 86. May 06 when I started delivering for the post office. You have no idea how many currently residing customers think they aren't the current resident. They would even say, my name isn't current resident. Story 87. I have a similar bookstore story. Years ago, I worked in a bookstore. Someone asked about books about dinosaurs. So in an effort to the detective work on what they were looking for, I asked if it was for an adult or kids. He said it was for an adult. Okay, fine. The second Jurassic Park movie had just come out, and dinos were big then. I followed up. Was he looking for artwork or more scientific material? Oh, scientific? Fine. I took him over to the paleontology section. As we walked, he wanted to make sure there were pics of the dinos, and I assured him that the books all would. While thumbing through a few books from museums of skeletons or other books that had artistic interpretations of the dinos, he clarified, Dun dun du etomar dampin. I want actual photos of actual dinosaurs. Oh, Jeebus. I had the unfortunate experience of trying to explain to this low-wattage moron that dinosaurs and cameras were separated by several 100 million years. He didn't take it well. Answer. OMG. I used to work as an art director in the school division of a publishing house and was working on a textbook unit titled When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth. The editors had final approval on all artwork, very frustrating, and this one editor was nitpicking every illustration. She finally said, "Why are we using illustrations in the first place? Can't we just get some photographs of these things?" And I got reprimanded for saying that we couldn't afford a photographer with a time machine. The same editor refused to sign off on that famous photo that's supposed to be the Loch Ness Monster until we could get verification that it was the actual monster. Story 88. You monster. Next, you're going to say Santa isn't real. Story 89. Maybe she started to tear up because she felt embarrassed. Story 90. Someone gave her a driver's license and a job. This is a common realization for me. Also that these people vote and reproduce. Story 91. Not gonna lie, I'd feel awful for her in your position, but at the same time, someone has to tell her eventually, you did the right thing. Story 92. Probably crying from embarrassment. Poor thing. Story 93. When I worked in a bookstore, someone asked for a similar type of book, but about mermaids. She, however, was about 7 years old. Guided her towards the science and education section of the kids department. Didn't have the heart to tell her, let her dad do it. Story 94. I did something similar, but not quite this stupid after reading The Princess Bride when I was about 10 or 11. I was convinced there was an unabridged version somewhere, and by God, I was going to find it. Story 95. Maybe she was looking for the Silmarillion LOL. Story 96. Wait, next, are you going to say that Star Wars isn't really set in galaxy far, far away? Story 97. I had a customer like that. I'm an insurance adjuster. I wrote an estimate on her car and sent her the check. She calls me when the car is done at the body shop and says she needs another check. I asked if she lost it. Nope, she said she bought a few handbags and I have to write her another check. She thought once you had a claim, she got free money. I had many people that years after having a claim, they'd have another accident, but couldn't comprehend that it would be a new claim. I could write a book on stupidity. Story 98. My great-grandma was like this. She was in her 80s, though. She kept offering to pay for everyone's shopping because she could use her card, so she wasn't spending any money. It was a debit card, and she didn't realize that her money was what she was using. She also tried to start a fight with her own reflection. Story 99. Yeah, people like this really need to be aware of how credit cards work, but alas, some just have to learn the hard way, even if it means debt collectors coming to your door. Story 100. We had a store credit card when I worked retail, and I encountered a few people like this. Ones who genuinely had no how credit cards worked. They just thought it was free money. Story 101. My college roommate was like this. If I didn't have money for something, she'd just be like, well, use your card. Her card was a debit tied to an account her dad put money in, but she did understand that it was actual money. It maybe she just couldn't comprehend me not having access to any money IDK. Story 102. Mid-90s, working retail. Woman's check bounces, kiddies go look up bank checks if you don't know. We tell her it bounced and may not have enough money. She said, enough money? I have all these checks, 'cause checks monies. Story 103. I thought that was how it worked when I was a young child. Story 104. My son thought that too. He was 7 at the time. I explained it to him, and he figured it out. So at 7, my son was smarter than your coworker. How do these people make it to adulthood? Story 105. Once I heard a story from a ranger about a woman who asked them where they put the animals at night. She literally thought they rounded up all the animals every night and put them in enclosures. Story 106. Reminds me of the why don't they move the deer crossing signs? Lady who thought that the signs control where the deer cross. Story 107. We went to Colorado to off-road in the mountains, and the place we stayed at had the bear-resistant trash cans. My fiance and I sat and watched a guy struggle with it for quite a while. Story 108. I heard that as a joke regarding the difficulty in designing park trash bins. It is just a joke though, right? Answer, probably more than just a joke. I worked one summer between Yellowstone and Grand Tetons. We had several tourists who were complete idiots. Just about every year someone gets gored in Yellowstone trying to take a selfie with a bison. Bison can run up to 40 miles. People have gotten severe burns stepping off the boardwalks at the hot springs. People try to take photos with bear cubs. But my favorite story was when a friend and I were at Old Faithful on our day off. A tourist came up to us and asked us, what time do they turn on Old Faithful? SMH. Story 109. It's funny until you actually use some of those dumpsters. Once the instructions get ripped off and the indicator stickers are gone or faded, and trust me, neither of those will be on the darn thing. It's a puzzle box. Story 110. There was a book I got on a trip across the U.S. when we stopped to see the Grand Canyon called Death in the Canyon. I spent the rest of the trip reading it, learning all the ways you could die in this place. No. One cause of death in the Grand Canyon is men pissing off the side, then getting vertigo and plummeting to their death. Answer, LMFAO. This reminds me of a guy I dated. As a kid, he had to wear a child leash because he was a handful, according to his mom, to put it lightly, LOL. His family went to the Grand Canyon one year, and he was leashed, obviously. While the family was standing around and taking in the sights, he took a running jump off the edge of the canyon, pulling his mom to the ground with the leash, dragging her to the edge as he fell. It took both parents to pull him back up over the edge by the leash. Idiot. LMFAO. Story 111. A few years ago, we were on a road trip through the Rockies. There was a beautiful and popular scenic overlook along the highway, so we stopped to check it out. It was very clearly marked where people were allowed to stand due to the obvious safety concerns about cliffs, falling rock, wildlife, etc. The number of people who blatantly ignored the signs and railings and simply climbed over them was astounding to me. There was one woman who was barely holding on to a very, very precipitous-looking rock face, trying to take a selfie, and my anxiety could not handle it. We needed to leave because I started getting so stressed that someone was going to fall and my children were going to witness a completely preventable death on our vacation. Answer. 200 people die every year falling in American national parks. People are way too nonchalant and stupid about this. I think most people think that if 200 people died from an activity every year, they would hear about it. And they haven't. So in their mind's absence of negative data, it must be safe. Idiots, edit. 200 may be the total deaths per year in national parks from all deaths of which falls make up a part. Some several thousand deaths over a 20-some-year period. I may have misread the data when I had it up. Story 112, or elevators. Let the folks off first before getting in, you barbarians. Story 113. Was in Germany and saw this little old lady press to the train door before it opened, then try valiantly to go against the tide of people coming out like a salmon returning upriver. I was so relieved to see that this didn't only happen in America. Story 114. Yeah, that's definitely annoying. We all have places we need or want to go to, but let's be respectful of other people's safety when they're getting off first. Story 115. I've had customers, PC store, insist on low-power laptops because fans emit dangerous EMF radiation. They could also feel our Wi-Fi from the router at the back of our store. Story 116. Electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Many people with this self-diagnosed disorder also have anxiety. Story 117. Shades of Better Call Saul. Story 118. I used to work in a cell phone store. Lady comes in with her husband and 2 kids for new phones. She insists that we turn off the 5G on her phones because they will be tracked otherwise. We kind of just shrug and agree to do it. Then when we set everything up, and she freaks out. Wait, we forgot to attach the 5G blocker from my old case. Her husband sighs. Honey, stop dragging these guys into your nonsense. No, the government is monitoring us through the 5G, and if I don't add the blocker, they will remotely reactivate it. Finally, the husband gets pissed and yells, I am so sick of this. I have tried to be nice. I have tried to be understanding, but now you're doing this shoot in front of the kids. Do not fill their head with this conspiracy bullshit. I look at her case and remove the blocker for her to put on the new case. It's just a thin piece of metal with some adhesive on the back. That's it. The couple barely spoke the rest of the transaction. Got 5 stars though. Yalalelo. Story 119. I worked with someone claiming to be EM sensitive. I remember one time we were on a business trip to an unfamiliar building, and as soon as she saw signs in the meeting room about Wi-Fi access, she started complaining that it was giving her a headache. Meanwhile, I could not detect any Wi-Fi at all on my phone. Our host opened the meeting by apologizing that the Wi-Fi was down. She just clammed up after that. Story 120. That reminds me of a trip I just took to a dark sky park where I went on a stargazing tour. Half the people wouldn't TFU about the satellites. JFC people, there were literal northern lights at one point and sick constellations. But the dots that moved were interesting. I might be getting this thread in the "What is a clear sign you're getting older" thread mixed up. Story 121. Schizophrenia because madness needs no reason. Story 122. For further context of the psychosomatic nature of that allergy, RFID doesn't emit anything. It has no power source. You power it with the signals from your own device that you are using to communicate with it. So if you are not actively bringing your own device and using your device to talk to it, then there are no signals coming from it because it has no way to make any. Story 123. I work at a gas station now. It blows my mind how many people have trouble pumping gas, and they come in and blame us for messing something up. 99.9% of the time it's user error. I learned quickly it's easier to just go pump the gas for these people because explaining how the system works usually just confuses them and takes longer. This happens several times a day. We have a look we give each other that means I'm headed out to pump gas for some idiot. Then at least once a week someone drives off with the pump still in their car. I really didn't think pumping gas was this difficult. Story 124. If you don't mind reliving the trauma, what were these people doing to fudge it up? Answer. I saw a lady trying to pump gas once. She grabbed the handle to pick it up, but depressed the lever at the same time. The nozzle started spewing gas and she could not figure out how to turn it off, or to regain her composure enough to just put it in the gas tank. It looked like she was wrestling a python. She was holding it with both hands and fighting with it while gas spewed everywhere. She got all tangled up and tripped herself, which was good because it made her let go. She just left it there on the ground and drove off, covered in gas. Story 125. Reminds me of the video where a driver pulled up to a pump, got out and realized the filler neck was on the other side of the car. So they go back in, swung around the parking lot to another pump and made the same mistake again, and again, and again, and again. Each time they go out, realized their mistake, and got back in and drove around again. Story 126. Almost every day someone surprised me by doing something wrong in a whole different way. Same. Story of my life. Story 127. My kids had a cotton candy machine that had an elaborate warning not to use around expensive paintings. Story 128. Right? We bought a new iron and there's a warning label that says, do not iron clothes while wearing, so you know someone ironed their shirt while wearing it, then sued because there was no warning label. Story 129. For me, it was when I bought a pack of plain almonds. It had a warning that it contained almonds. Story 130. This isn't the only reason, though. People often negligently hurt themselves and then claim the products are dangerous for the lawsuit. The warning labels let the manufacturer cover themselves. Story 131. Around 25 years ago, I was doing security at a research institution. One thing we did was to run a password cracker against all the password hashes in the L.P directory, which was used for login to everything from email to grant administration. The number of scientists and engineers who set their LDEAP password to variations on the theme of fudge UIT was disappointing. Story 132. I wish I could say that I was surprised, but my husband also works in InfoSec. Story 133. I have begged my wit to do this so that the people who keep compromising our security finally face even a tiny bit of shame. Come on. Story 134. I'm head of IT and marketing. I have someone at work that would fail basic phishing. My only option is to severely lock her computer down. She complains about not being able to do certain things, so I have to make up reasons why it's so locked down. She simply won't understand if I try to explain. I've tried so many times. She lacks curiosity. Story 135. My employer sent a link on where to go to see your merit increase. It was a very thing to do. No, I didn't click on the link. I reported it like a good lackey. Still waiting on my merit increase my employer said I was getting. Story 136. I knew someone while pregnant with their third kid who told another person they couldn't get pregnant unless they'd had an orgasm because that was the only way you released eggs. The person went, oh, okay, I should be fine then. My teenage self had to explain to those two adults how it actually worked. Story 137. I had incompetent cervix and had to go on bed rest. My boss at the time scoffed and said I had 2 children and I don't even have a cervix. Turned out she had no clue what a cervix is. Story 138. This reminds me of someone I used to know who had her first kid at 14-15. She thought that you had to want a kid in order to get pregnant. She wised up after that. Story 139. My mind turned into mush reading that quote. Story 140. By client, I hope you were her social worker or something, because she clearly needs adult help. Story 141. Well, clearly, they're putting gay into the water supply. Story 142. I remember that, and she was like, it didn't do that when I was a kid. Story 143. One of my college roommates dated a guy who refused to drink tap water because he believed that there were so many women on birth control that it was impossible for the water treatment plants to filter out all the estrogen in urine. If males drank this water, they would grow breasts. He told us that he didn't trust city water and demanded that we keep bottled water in our fridge for when he visited. Roommate bought a few bottles and always refilled them with tap water after he left. Dumb never noticed they weren't sealed. Story 144. I know this isn't the same level at all, but I saw an influencer posting a video with her making chocolate-covered cherries. She got some cherries and covered them in chocolate. And loads, and I mean loads, of the comments were asking for a recipe. Story 145. Looking back at history and all the people who drank mercury or ate lead as medicines and going, why did they do that when it was known to be poisonous? And then you realize that we still have it, including a head of state who urged people to genuinely drink bleach.